Howdy modelers, this is HobbyLink Japan website manager Brian with another episode of Boss Builds. We're building the Fujimi 1/72nd scale Type 10 main battle tank, as you know if you've been watching along. And for this exciting episode, we're going to talk about decals. So last night I sat down and as I promised last time, I did some work with the decals on the 1/72nd scale Fujimi Type 10 main battle tank of the Japan Ground Self-Defense Forces. Not a big job, as you can see here. It's a very small model, but there were only 5 decals total that you had to put on the tank. There were serial numbers in the rear, and on the front you can see there's the little chrysanthemum GA mark, which probably from the camera's viewpoint looks like a little white dot, but it is like a star-shaped chrysanthemum, not a star, it's a chrysanthemum. And then the prototype testing markings that you see on the sides of the turret. And that is it for the kit supply decals. Now last time I mentioned that Fujimi didn't really provide any detail for the tail lights on the back. They were just flat planks basically back there. So what I did is I rifled through my spare decals box and found something that looks a little like, I'll bring it up here, like this. You can only see the yellow on this side. Oh, here we go. This is actually some of the parts I cut out of it. Had a little orange and a little yellow, kind of replicate the yellow and orange tail lights on the Type 10, and I just used my trusty hobby knife, cut them out and slapped them on there as straight as I could get them. They're a little rough. If you look closely with a magnifying glass, you can see that there's some little chunks. Those decals were quite sensitive, as it were, quite fragile, so I got some little chunks out of that there, but again, it's on the lower part of the tank, and we know what that means, weathering, so weathering will cover up some of that, I hope. As you remember last time, I was concerned about the problem of silvering, because I painted it with flat paints, of course, and it's usually recommended, excuse me, recommended to put decals on a glossy surface, so you don't get the dreaded silvering. Just to recap what silvering is a condition you can see on the clear sections of decals when you put it on particularly flat surfaces, flat meaning like matte, not shiny, and you get microscopic little air bubbles, not like bubbles, but air is trapped under there, and it reflects the light and it looks silvery. Now in my modeling career, over 2 decades, maybe even 3, of building models, I've never really had a problem with it. I've always just slapped the decals on and they've always looked good. I've occasionally had a problem with silvering, but I'd always just chalk that up to inferior decals for various kits. So I've never really done the gloss first, put a decal on, and avoid the silvering thing, because I've never really had that much of a problem with it. Although now that we started doing this video series, I figured I'd better at least address that, because it is very accepted throughout the modeling community, gloss and decal, and then put your flat on top of that. So I just went ahead and tried it as usual, and just put them on there and didn't have any problems with silvering at all. However, maybe I should have done another test subject to see if it would have silvered. I used this product, which is all in Japanese here. We actually can sell this, although it is liquid in a bottle. We haven't had any problems with shipping it overseas yet. It's from High-Q Parts. You might have seen Sid and Ryan using some High-Q parts in the Gunpla TV series, but they also make this. They make decals, and they make this decal solution. It's called Decal Fixer, and its claim to fame, as it says here on the bottle, is it combats silvering. Now they caveat that by saying it's not a 100% guarantee that you won't have silvering, but it says it goes a long way to help knock down the occurrence of silvering. So I use this, and all you do is you dab a little bit of this on where you want to put the decal. You put the decal on, pat it down a little bit, apply a little bit more, pat it down a little bit more with a nice lint-free cloth, and it sets up, and there you go. It's not really like a decal setting solution per se, like some of the other GSI Krios products or Tamiya products, where it actually kind of melts the decal and gets it to sit into the details of the model. This is only claiming that it will help combat the silvering, and if it also kind of does a fixing setting function as it does that, then well, more the better. All these decals were set on completely flat surfaces, so I didn't really get a chance to see if this helps the decals conform to the raised and lowered sections of details that you would have on there. But anyway, I didn't get any silvering so far. I haven't put any flat coats or anything else on top of this to knock down the colors. or knock down the shine. But so far so good. So we will have a link to this on the HobbyLink TV page, so check it out. It's orderable and it's pretty cheap too, and it worked this time. So recommended. Now let's talk about decals for a second. I'll put the tank down and bring up the sheet. This is the Fujimi sheet, and you can see I didn't use too many. They give you, again, all the markings for all the tank regiments in Japan, so you could make at this point in time, a what-if model and make it, again, any regiment in Japan. I used the markings that were shown in the prototype testing trials, which you can see on here. It's got that little M for, is it AM? Again, can't really see it, I'd have to check. I thought these were probably the most colorful, and so I put those on there. And it would be, I also wanted to check for the silvering thing. This seemed to have the most clear film element to it. Now, for those of you out there who aren't too familiar with water slide decals, which is what these are, water slide meaning you cut them out, you dip them in water for about 10 seconds, then set it aside, and what the water does is it, decals are printed on decal film, of course, with the backing, and it's all hooked up with a type of glue, and when you put it in the water, that glue softens and it releases the image, and then you take the decal while it's still on the paper backing, slide it onto the model, and again, as we described a minute ago, you pat it down, get it set up the way you want it, and when it dries, it's adhered to the surface. So that's why they're called water slide. You put them in water and you slide them off. I just cut these out. You can use scissors. They make special decal use scissors. I'm not really sure, but the point of that is regular scissors work fine. I just use a hobby knife, lay it on my cutting pad, and chop them right out and put them on there. And again, I used the Fujimi set, of course, for that, and I used those other decals, which I think came from a 1/72nd scale NASA F-104 test aircraft or whatever. It had a lot of orange and yellow combinations, so I used that again for the tail lights. And just slid them on there, and again, no silvering so far. We'll see how it holds up with the weathering and putting the flat coats on top of that, and hopefully it will hold up pretty good. So the decaling is done, with the only extra addition not in the kit I made was making these little tail light things in the back there, tail light colors, and the things on the front. And again, the detail painting is done here, so the next step for this will be the weathering and the final coat. But since we're talking about decals, this was water slide decals. Another option when you're decaling or putting markings on your tank is dry transfers. Now here at HobbyLink Japan, we carry a good selection of MIG Productions dry transfers and Archer fine transfers from the US. Now I've used both of these on various projects, and boy, these are just excellent. This is the next best thing to actually having them painted on there, and that's essentially what you get. Again, with just to go back to water slide decals, it's printed on a film, so you get a lot of clear sections, you get a lot of edge around the decal or the actual marking itself that the marking itself is printed on. So particularly in small scales like this, it's really difficult to get rid of the edge. You'll always see an edge around it, even if you have no silvering, and no matter what you do with coatings on top of that. Just to ramble on a little bit more about that, some people take very, very fine sandpaper and will go over the decal once it's applied to kind of knock down that hard edge. I've never tried that, and it seems a little scary, but for some people it works beautifully. I've seen some fine results for that. But that's kind of a tricky technique to use, and whenever you're sanding on top of decals, you know, who knows what can happen there. But anyway, to avoid all that, fine transfers like these. Now how these work is you cut them out just like a regular decal. What's a good thing? For example, this star here for the Sherman, you would just cut out that thing there, and it's actually attached reverse-wise. The carrier medium is on the front, and the marking is actually stuck to it from the back. So you would cut that out, and what a lot of people do is you put some cellophane tape or whatever on the top of it, and then just put it where you want it on the model, tape it on there, and the way you get it to stick to the model is you burnish it with either a special burnishing tool they make, and you can get those for art shops, or the rounded end of a paintbrush. Usually something kind of soft and woody is good to get it on there. And by burnishing, it means when it's, for example, if this was the model, I would put it on there, and you would just sort of rub it on there, covering it all. I think if I remember as a kid you had rub-on transfers. Well, it's essentially the same thing. You're transferring it from the medium to the surface. So you would just rub, rub, rub. And a key point to using transfers is make sure you get it really burnished on there good. Cover all the sections, because if you leave any of it off, when you peel the backing off of it, you'll rip up parts of the decal, or the marking. So you got to really burnish it on there. And then when you're done, take your tape and just pull the whole thing off. And if it all goes well, which it always has for me, the marking will be perfectly secured or perfectly applied to the surface with absolutely no clear spots around it, no clear spots in the middle. For example, this Sherman star, it's got the star with the white hoop around it there. If that was a regular waterslide decal, all that part in between the star and the circle would be clear film, which would be susceptible to the silvering problem. And of course, around the edges, as we mentioned, you'll always see the edge. So essentially what this does is it's the same as paint. It only puts on the colors onto the model, as you can see here. And for this particular MIG set here, these Russian slogans or Russian markings for T-34 and KV series tanks, also 172 scale. It's all one color, just these numbers and things like that, but you can also get them in various colors like this, these colorful set here for a Free French M3A3 tank. And they just work beautifully. If you can find the transfers for the subject that you're doing, I highly recommend using dry transfers. And that's the only problem. With a lot of models, like the old Type 10 here, is at this point in time, there are no dry transfer sets for it. But there is a very wide selection available for World War II tanks, and even in some modern armor as well, aircraft and things like that too. So if you can get them, dry transfers are the way to go. But for this little guy, I had to use the supplied waterslide decals, and they actually turned out pretty good. But again, if you look at it with the magnifying glass, you can certainly see the raised edges of the clear film around it, which will to some extent be knocked down by the weathering and clear coats later. But if they were dry transfers, that wouldn't be a problem at all. So, just to wrap up a kind of short show today, did the decaling. The next step I will do for this is I'm still debating, now here's the ironic thing, I'm still debating on gloss coating the whole thing and applying some weathering techniques like that. I've always, up till now, generally when I'm weathering, I like to use the flat finish, and I use what's like a sludge wash, where you have a kind of a thick, murky, dark color that you just slob all over the vehicle, and then you can go back and kind of wipe it off. And I've always found that a flat surface kind of works better for that. Although the bugaboo there is sometimes as it dries, you get these weird concentric rings as the wash dries. And then you have to go back with some thinner on a cotton swab or something and try to get all those off. And since I've used acrylics so far on this, I'm kind of afraid that swabbing and wiping might go right back down to the plastic. So I'm a little leery of that. I'm still considering spraying the whole thing with Future Floor Polish, which I think has some different names in different countries, but it's an acrylic-based floor polish, very, very sturdy, very, very shiny. People use it for making their aircraft canopies extremely clear. As I mentioned before, they use it for making a glossy surface for decals. And you also can use it for the weathering process. Put the gloss coat on there with the Future. And then what that allows you to do is you can use enamel washes, pin washes, and you can put it on there and it will just go right into the crevices, but it won't really stay on the shiny surface, and it's easy to wipe off too. Since the Type 10 is usually not an incredibly grimy tank, it might be dusty and muddy, which is kind of the way I'm going to do this, but it's not necessarily grimy, so I'm thinking that might be the better way to go with this particular build, because there's a lot of good engraved detail on this Fujimi kit, and if I can get the wash to settle cleanly in all those recess parts, panel lines, the tank has a lot of panel lines on it with the modular armor and the skirts on the side. I think that it'll look pretty good. It'll really make it pop out. Right now, if you look at it, it's kind of flat, and flat meaning like one-dimensional, and toy-like, two-dimensional maybe. So a good wash like that gets into the crevices will really give it more dimension and make it pop out. So I'm kind of talking myself into doing that right now here on live on camera, so that might be the way I go. I will probably test the future on the underside or whatever to make sure that the future doesn't react poorly with the colors I'm already using. So it's all an experiment. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? So future, to get the shiny coat, some washes to get into the recesses, and then after that I will probably flat coat it again, because I do want to do some dry brushing, and dry brushing, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't work well at all on shiny surfaces, because we talked about dry brushing before. You load your paint up with some whatever color you want to dry brush, and then you just lightly drag it on there. If it's got a gloss coat on there, it really doesn't want to stick, so that's why a flat coat is good for that. So I'll probably flat coat it, do some dry brushing with some of the basic colors just to hit the highlights, and then do dry brushing also for mud and dust effects, and then I'll probably end that up using the airbrush again to make everything nice and dusty from the bottom up. Get a consistent finish over there, looking at the references of these tanks as they're being tested. On the one thing I noticed looking at the references is, if you see on the back here, these two box-like structures on the sides are actually the exhaust ports. And this is a diesel-powered tank, and as we all know, diesels like to puff out a lot of soot in this modern day of green technologies and stuff. Yes, diesels are still sooty. So I'll use the airbrush and put little tiny puffs of a sooty color on the back of that, and that will probably be the final touch to finish up the tank. So we're up to, I believe this is episode 8 right now. It's a tiny little tank, but one step at a time. I'm trying to get it to look as good as I can get it. Oh, and one final point, as I always mention whenever I do these things, when I was building it, couldn't see anything, vision going. Doing the detail painting, can't see anything, got to use the magnifying glass. And this time putting the decals on, even, like the little tiny, the tiny chrysanthemum, just looks like a little white dot. I had to get in there to make sure that the star shape was actually going the right way. So yeah, I really need to invest in some sort of a magnifying visor headset or something like that. A lot of people have been writing and saying, hey Brian, try this out, try that out. So yeah, small scale vision problems. Along those lines, I've seen some people using it. This is quite clever actually. Little CCD cameras, I'm not sure what they're called. Tiny little camera, you can mount it on a tripod and get it right up close to your model, and you can have like a monitor off to the side, and you can just see what, working here, looking at the monitor over here, and get in close and work with details like that. So that's another more expensive option, but it is an option nonetheless. I remember back a while ago, before I actually thought I had a serious vision problem, I'd always, when I was done with the model, I would take a lot of close-up photos of it and then blow them up on the computer and make sure that everything was kosher before I would bring it to a show or something like that. But that was just to get like the really, really tiny details right. Now it's like, oh, okay, is the decal straight? Some of the problems I'm having here. So yeah, vision correction. Might even need to go see an eye doctor at some point, because modeling is fun, but if you can't see it, it's not. All right, that's enough rambling about decals for today. Waterslide, dry transfers, this fine product here, decal fixer, highly recommended. It worked fine for me on this project. I will try it again on my next project and report on that, and hopefully it works just as well then. And for the next time you see me, hopefully I will have made my decisions on what I'm going to do about the wash, and we'll talk about washing and weathering next time we see you on Boss Builds.